Welcome to episode 17 of the Mile 62 podcast. I'm your host, Richard Elkins, coming to you from Austin, Texas. We cover all things ultra running in the southern United States with a special focus on the Texas racing scene. This is an exciting podcast. Got two key things I want to talk about today. The first is a race recap for Jackalope Jam 48-hour race. It was an exciting weekend. I finished first overall and first in the Masters category. That hasn't happened in a really long time. I'm 53 years old and I don't win many races anymore, but it's pretty exciting. The second thing I would like to go over with you is the Olympic marathon trials, which are coming up on this Saturday, February 29th. I'll review the top athletes for the men's and women's field and tell you a little bit about what's going on Saturday. Okay, so let's get started. First thing, Jackalope Jam. So Jackalope Jam was started last Friday. The start time was 9 a.m. So, the race is taking place in Cat Springs, Texas. Excuse me. Which is near Houston, so I had to get up around 3:30 in the morning and drive out there so I could arrive around 7 because I set up my tent, got my base camp ready. I knew that the weather conditions could be bad on Friday. Saturday was a little bit unknown, so I took a lot of different clothes, lots of different shoes, 3 or 4 different jackets, 2 or 3 different gloves, and some food and stuff. You never know what the aid station's going to have. But I was more than prepared, as I know what can go wrong and what has gone wrong in the past, and I just learned from my mistakes. Well, I got set up, and everything went well. Got to the starting line. We started at 9 a.m., and the race was already ongoing because there's a 72-hour race too that started on Thursday. So there were some people in the field already. So we got going. I got off to a pretty good start, not too fast pace. And the first few hours were pretty uneventful. I found out that I was in second place about 3 hours into the race. And I was really curious who was in first place. I had no idea. And I finally worked that out, and I followed the first place. I basically increased my pace, caught the person in first place, and basically followed him or flanked him for about 1 hour, looking for a good time to pass and trying to figure out, my pacing strategy because, this is a 48-hour race. So there was we still had quite a bit to go. And I had an opportunity about 4 hours in the race when we went through the checkpoint to make a pass. Keep in mind that the loop track that we were racing on was 1.5 miles. It was 1.5 miles loop trail with some elevation, some parts flat, but basically it was sand and rocks trail. So when around 4 hours, I think we were about 20 miles into the race, I made my move, and I passed him, and I really increased my pace. I ran for 2 laps, and when I came back around, even on the first lap, because as you go through the checkpoint, you're going back on the same lap. So you may have a lead on somebody, but you will see them coming the other direction. But I did not see him. And the second lap, I did not see him. And actually, for a few hours, I did not see him. I wasn't sure if he dropped out of the race or was taking a break. I didn't think he would drop out of the race because he looked like he was a Navy SEAL. Almost everyone that I was competing against was either in the military or ex-military. He had his ruck sack had some diving insignation on it, So I thought he's a Navy SEAL, and turns out he was very, very experienced. He was wearing a hat that said "Unbreakable," so, which kind of got me motivated, because I was looking at that for a long time, because following a guy with a hat that says "Unbreakable." So I kept my pace up, and I think it was mid-afternoon on Friday. He came back into the race. He took a few hours break. Turns out that his hands got swollen and his shoulders got swollen. We were carrying 20-pound Ruck sack. Basically, it's a backpack, military-style backpack. I was using a Speed Ruck, which is a Go Ruck brand of Ruck, which had a 20-pound metal plate in it. And my shoulders really were starting to hurt. I trained with it. I wore it at home. But the pressure points on your shoulders really start to hurt. And I had a special sternum strap so that I could adjust my rucksack so that I could pull my straps in or out on my shoulders. But it didn't seem to help too much. Probably early evening, my shoulders really started to hurt. The pain was pretty intense, and I took a break for about 15 minutes. I had a chair outside of my tent so that when I sat down, it would take the weight off my shoulders because my pack would push up against it. And at that point, I decided to add some clothes, because it was about 60 during the day, 55, 60, but it was going to get down into the low 30s during the night. So I was wearing shoes. I was wearing Ultra Olympus, which is my go-to shoe for very long events. Probably done 10 plus 60-mile events and a couple 100-mile events in Ultra Olympus. So I really thought that they would help me with carrying the weight on my shoulders. And I was using Injinji toe socks, and I ended up putting on a pair of wool socks on top, and then I was wearing gaiters to protect sand from going in my shoes, and I had some tights on, which I added some thermal underwear, and then one Nike sweatpants on top. So I had 3 layers on my bottom and a couple of layers of shirts and a light coat on top. I was using a padded coat that had some down in it, which would help me with my backpack. It would prevent from chafing on the bottom end of my lower back, and also help just felt more comfortable on my shoulders. Anyways, I got going, and like was forecasted, it really got cold. At one point, I took off my thin gloves, which are really rated down to freezing, and I put on some insulate gloves that I use for skiing. So I basically was running with ski gloves. It was really cold, and that continued all night. Luckily, we didn't have any rain. On Thursday, they had rain and cold weather, but we were pretty lucky. But it got cold enough where most people on the course, they slept. They went in and took a long break, slept for 5 or 6 hours. I didn't do that. I didn't feel tired. I'd been drinking coffee. I had some 10-hour brewed coffee that I brought, about 2 jugs of that. I was well prepared on the coffee scene. And they had some very good vegetable soup and mashed potatoes that I was eating from the aid station. And I just kept going all night. And that really was the turning point for the whole race, because my key competition decided to take a break. And when the morning came around, I had about a 15-mile lead on second place. So I was doing pretty good. But they were very serious about trying to catch me. Basically, both days they just pushed really hard, the top contenders, to catch me. And I saw them early morning. One interesting thing is on the track, or the course, I should say, at the end of the course, they had a big red cone, and they called it the cone of death, and it had some eyeballs on it and a flashing red light during the dark. it looked pretty spooky. Around 6:30 in the morning on Saturday morning, keep in mind I've been up for more than 24 hours. I wasn't hallucinating, but it was a little bit of a daze. I drank some coffee, but me and another guy were running, and then we're like, hey, what is that? At the cone, there was a giant skunk. Talking about waking you up. So we just stood perfectly still. The guy in front of me was probably 10 feet away from the skunk, and I was about 20 yards. And we stood there for a second, and the skunk just took off running and left. Got very lucky. I think we were both pretty close enough to get sprayed. But that kind of woke me up. The day started progressing, got a little bit hotter. The morning got up into the 50s. I had to shed some clothes. Didn't take any breaks. I took one break around lunchtime for probably 15 or 20 minutes to kind of clean out my shoes. Even though I had gaiters on, sand was still getting into my shoes. And I saw my competitors trying very hard to catch me, and I just didn't let up. I knew that if I kept moving, even if I was going at a slower pace than they were now, I would maintain my lead, and it basically be impossible for them to catch me. And that was my strategy. I went until, I think it was early evening. I felt I had a bad blister, which is very unusual because I don't get blisters in races, even really long races. And I think it's because when you carry the weighted ruck, it really puts pressure on your feet in a different way than you would without it. And it's not like being 20 pounds heavier. It's the weight is coming down on your middle torso, and the body is trying to adjust, and it adjusts your gait. And military friends were telling me that basically there's weight all the time on your feet, whereas in running it's a limited period of time when there's weight on your feet. So I think that's what's caused my blisters, and the other reason that I think it was is because the big temperature swing. So during the race we saw anywhere from 33 degrees up to 75 degrees in a 48-hour period. So I think I should have taken off my wool socks that were on top of my toe socks a little bit earlier. I didn't take them off till midday, and I think there was some moisture in my shoes, and that caused the blisters. But anyways, I had to take off my shoes, and I used one of my safety pins from my number, and I had to release pressure on some of the blisters on my feet. And then after I did that and cleaned them up with some alcohol, and basically got going again, I felt fine. Went into the night, felt pretty good. They were really pushing hard, not taking any breaks, trying to catch me. I was able to maintain my lead and actually gained a few more miles on them. And I kept going so I didn't sleep any of the Friday night. Saturday night, I think it was about 11:30 at night. I tried to lay down. Had some bad luck. I had an air mattress. Had it aired up, and then went in there to lay down on it, and it was almost out of air, so I must have a hole in the mattress. Anyways, I laid down. My body basically forced me to sleep, I think, and I fell asleep. And I woke up, and I felt like I had slept all night. And I figured, well, I must have slept for a couple hours. Got my pack back on, drank some coffee, got running. And I looked down at my watch, and I'd only slept 18 minutes. But it's really amazing how little time you need to sleep for your body to completely reset. I've read some ultra runners say that you only need 7 or 8 minutes to really feel like you've slept a long time. It's really amazing how the body works. There's so much that we don't know about how a human body works. But I felt completely re-energized and felt like I'd slept all night. And I'd slept less than 20 minutes. Drank some coffee, kept going. They had some breakfast tacos early hours of the morning. Sunrise was really beautiful. I forgot to mention on Friday night, it looked like it was either it wasn't a UFO, I'm sure, but there was a planet that was kind of gold in color in the sky, and we were so far out in the wilderness there, there's no pollution. You could see the stars were so beautiful, and a couple of people were taking pictures of it, and it was kind of low in the sky, and it was golden color, and many people thought it was a planet, but it was really amazing how clear and beautiful the sky was. And the sunrises were the same way. They were really pretty, and hear the birds, and not many animals out there this time of year because they're smarter than humans. They go underground. There's no snakes or anything. It's too cold. But there were some birds, and we saw some skunks, and that was really about it. But Saturday was much warmer, like I said, and that evening, like I said, I only slept 18 minutes and went through the night, and I think it was about 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning I realized that I had over a 20-mile lead. So, and I was only about 12 miles away from hitting 100 miles for the race. And so I told myself my goal was I want to achieve 100 miles. So that's what I did. I kept pushing at it, and I achieved 100 miles, actually 100.5 miles, about 7 o'clock in the morning. And the race was going until 9 a.m. And it looked like I had about a 25-mile lead because they took a break again. And so I basically stopped and started packing up my stuff, and to pack up my tent and get ready to go. So I had to stick around to the finish of the race, and everything went well. I mean, had great conversations with the other leaders in the race, second and third place, and great guys, military guys, and they suggested I go out and run the Bantam Death March in New Mexico, which is every March. That sounded very interesting because my grandfather was in the Bantam Death March when he was caught by the Japanese in the Philippines during World War II. So immediately had the idea that they thought I would do very well, and it's only a 26-mile race, and I think I will do that next March. It's too late to do it this year, but do it next year and take my normal gear out there, but I'm going to put a picture of my grandfather on my back of my rucksack and compete in that race. And it's the race is a memorial for the Bantam Death March, and I think what better way to do it and then to also memorial to my grandfather, which is not around anymore. But that's it. It was a great weekend. First place overall, and then first place Masters category. Can't ask for more. And when I was going through, I didn't mention it earlier, but when I was going through the chute, every loop, they would yell out M1. M1 means first place male. There's nothing more motivating than that. I mean, you hear that and you just don't want to quit. It's like you don't hear that very often. I mean, it really motivated me. And anyways, that's it. I look forward to next year. Okay, in part 2 of this podcast, I'd like to talk about the Olympic marathon trials, which are taking place this Saturday, February 29th in Atlanta. It's being sponsored by the Atlanta Track Club, and they've really done an amazing job. They've set up the course in Atlanta, and basically there are about 238 men that are racing and 458 females. That's about 700 athletes in this race. What's amazing is the Atlanta Track Club is paying for their travel and accommodation for the Olympic trials. And what's neat about the Olympic trials, I mean, it is a road race, and I'm involved in trail racing, but I also have an interest in road racing because I spend a lot of time on the roads, and I raced the roads before, and it's a big part of our running community. the course is basically 3 8-mile loops and with nonstop rolling hills. And then on the last 8-mile loop, they have a 2.2-mile add-on. And this course has a lot of elevation for a road race. It's got 1,389 feet of elevation. And basically, if you compare that to Boston has 900 feet. People think of that as a hilly course. So it's going to be a really tough race, and nonstop rollers, so it's really hard to adjust, to find your pace, and it should slow the marathon down a little bit and make it more competitive, because some people, especially they're coming from a trail background, it gives them a little bit of advantage. The qualifying time for this year was 2 hours and 19 minutes for the men, or 1 hour and 4 minutes for a half marathon. For the women, it was 2 hours and 45 minutes, or 1 hour and 13 minutes for the half. And this marathon has a 3 hour and 15 minute cutoff time. Boy, that's scary. I couldn't even get within an hour of that. So if they don't finish within 3 hours and 15 minutes, they're not even in the results. Isn't that crazy? Well, let's talk about if you want to see this race, it's going to take place on Saturday. Like I said, you can see it on NBC. The race starts at 12:08 p.m. in the afternoon for the men, and the women is 12:20 p.m. Let's talk about the key athletes in the race and my favorite picks. So the top seed for the men is, of course, Galen Rupp. Galen Rupp runs for Nike, and he has a PR of 2 hours and 6 minutes. But one thing about Galen Rupp is he recently had Achilles surgery, and he's been trying to come back from injury. He DNF'd at the recent Chicago Marathon, but he ran a half marathon last month at 1 hour and 4 minutes. 1 hour and 1 minute. So that's really fast. So he seems to be coming along. So you have Galen Rupp. My other favorites are Leonard Courier. He has a 2:07 PR, which he ran in Amsterdam. He's also a U.S. half marathon champ and 10K champ, and he's a Kenyan, but he's now American citizen. Very fast guy, and trains with the U.S. Army team. I have him as my number 2 pick, and then number 3 I have Jared Ward. Jared Ward is got a 2:09 PR. He's a former Olympian, just like Galen Rupp. I forgot to mention, Galen Rupp had won the 2016 trials and also was in the Olympics. And Jared Ward had got 3rd in the Olympic trials and was in the Olympics. So he has good experience. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to see Galen Rupp, Leonard Courier, and Jared Ward make the team. The other top guy, I think, should be in maybe the 4th or 5th spot. I think Scott Fauble, which runs over NAZ Elite. He did really well in Boston with a 2:09 time. I think that he could take out Courier if he runs a really strong day. So those are my top 4 picks. I have to give a shout out to Jim Walmsley. Everyone in the ultra community is rooting for Jim Walmsley. We think that, at least I should say, I think that he's going to make the race interesting because he's the Western States champion. He's been logging 170-mile weeks, and he could take out this could make the lead pack go out in front of the lead pack and really make the race interesting. Most people, including myself, don't think he will make the team, but I think he's going to really show the world what he can do. He's a really impressive guy in the ultra running community. He ran a 1:04 half to qualify, which is the bare minimum, but a lot of us think that he's going to go from good to great in the road scene. So let's see what happens. My dark horse is Matthew Lano, which has run a lot of good marathons. He has a 2:11 PR. So let's see. I think that it's going to be a very interesting race on the men's side. Temperature-wise, it should be around 40 degrees with some light winds. So light to medium strength winds. So that should make it very challenging because, as we know, runners do not like wind. And, it's a hilly course with wind. It's going to make it very interesting. On the women's side, we have it's much more competitive, in my opinion, than the men. There's probably 8 or 10 women that could win this race. So it's really hard to pick a top 3, but I will try to do that. My top pick is Emily Sisson, which has got a 2:23 PR. She ran that in London Marathon, just an absolute phenomenal athlete. Number 2, I've got Jordan Hasay, which is a accomplished marathoner. And then I've got Sally Kipyego, which also trains with ANAZ Elite. I think a lot of people are not talking about her very much, but I think she could be there in the top 3. You got Desiree Linden, which won Boston 2 years ago. She's getting older, and many people think that maybe it's just too competitive for her now, but you can never forget about her. She always has a way of coming out and making a win sometimes. You got Molly Huddle, Kellen Taylor, Sarah Hall, which is the wife of Ryan Hall, the greatest American runner of all times. So really strong field. So, like I said, I've got Emily Sisson, Jordan Hasay, and Sally Kipyego as the top 3. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Ultra scene, we have Io Wang, which is running. She doesn't have a chance to make the team, but she runs in the 2:35 range. But she did qualify for the marathon and will be out there. So it should be a very interesting race. That's all I have for this week. Thanks for listening to my podcast. If you'd like to follow me on social media, it's Runner RWE on Instagram, Twitter, Strava, and Facebook. Excuse me. Feedback and questions, please email to me at runnerrwe@gmail.com. And please give me a review on iTunes and subscribe if you like my podcast. Shout out to my equipment sponsors, Ultra Aspire for lighting and hydration, and Squirrel's Nut Butter for chafing products. Have a great weekend out there running. Bye-bye.